Hello, friends. Here we are continuing a treatise on white magic. We're on commentary number 26 and the fifth section of rule number 3. I'm designating these as 3.3, 3.4, 3.5. We're on page 111. We've been dealing with the idea of whether there is not a mental approach to truth and a loving approach to truth, and whether one cannot actually rest back on one and the other, or one or the other, and not worry especially about developing any compensating ability along the other line. But let's just say DK tells us that it all ends in universal love, whether you're taking the mental approach or the more loving approach. The sign of universality is Aquarius, and we're going to have 25,000 years of it in the larger sense of a great Platonic age. So the blending of the two will be required. We begin with some people knowing God and having to develop love, some people loving God and having to develop knowledge, but it all ends in this universal love raying out to all nature and all forms of life. We see very much, excuse me, how the Christ expresses. Universal love will follow on a more developed knowledge of God, but this will be part of his development in another life. So we cannot look at one incarnation and say that what we see is the entirety of a man's development. Maybe only certain things, certain aspects of development are visible in a particular life. So we're not in a position to judge, not seeing the immediately preceding lives or the succeeding lives. The master can see this. So we have to reserve judgment. Always there will be a compensatory reaction, and eventually the rounded out individual will be produced, maybe with some leaning here or there, but basically rounded out. The planet Venus and Jupiter bringing both the mind and love aspect together and the wisdom and the love aspect together will have their effect upon the developing disciple. So let us move forward here. Yes, all development ends in the development of universal love, at least in this solar system. Our universe is, from one perspective, our solar system. I mean, it's not the grand entirety. The word universe is used in various ways. A galaxy is a universe. It's an island universe. So watch the way that word is used. Now here we are on page 111, and students of human nature, and this all aspirants should be. Why? Because all those who enter hierarchy are equipped as esoteric psychologists. They know something of the psyche or soul. So all students of human nature would do well to bear in mind that there are temporary differences, and the word is temporary. Well, I suppose, we are everything, ultimately. It sounds banal, or, it sounds superficial, or, impractical to say that, but in the last analysis, there's no way to prevent any being from being ultimately all beings, nor to prevent a universal logos, which is an immense being, from being an infinitesimal within absolute infinitude. But that's another subject perhaps on the third ray, and although I'm always tempted to get into it, it leads too far. So anyway, people differ in the ray, which affects primarily the magnetism of the life. Let's see the kind of people and circumstances we draw to ourselves. The people who differ in the, and remember, these are, what's as you say, temporary differences. The final individual is far more rounded out than the temporary differences would suggest. But look, there's a difference in in planetary logi. Look at the hardline rays of Saturn. Look at the, well, are there any that are just on the soft line? Maybe not, but I mean, you look at Saturn with its 3 and its 1s, and then you look at Venus perhaps with its strong 2nd and 6th ray. 5th ray is there, of course. There are definite ray differences for beings such as planetary logi, and for various solar logi. Maybe there are solar logi with strong hardline rays, but look at our sun. The probable eventual 2nd ray monad, and present possibly 4th ray monad, presently a 2nd ray soul, presently a 2nd ray personality. Look at the soft line there and realize that it's largely a Davic being. So whereas we can relate the Devas to rays 2 and 3, we relate man to 1 and 2, and they both share the 2. That's a little sort of tabulation from a treatise on cosmic fire. So their approach to truth may be different, either the occult or the mystic path having the stronger drawing power. We say, why are Master Jesus and Master Serapis going to Sirius, or going before long on the path to Sirius? And it's because they need, in a larger and higher sense, monastic stimulation. But probably the Tibetan, I speculate, but probably the Tibetan, with his incredible knowledge and monastic development, would not take the path to Sirius. Yet eventually the Christ will, even though he's on the ray path now, becoming a great ray of love wisdom. So about the fate of these different masters and their destiny, we can only speculate. But there are distinct approaches to truth, though no high being will be devoid of the opposite truth. There's plenty of occultism in the Master Jesus and the Master Serapis, even though perhaps they have trodden the mystic path primarily. Then there's the question of polarization, deciding the emotional, mental, or physical intent of a life. And how does it go? Always the soul and personality will be expressing primarily through one or other of the lower vehicles, leaving one vehicle free of their impress. Let's say, well, he did, I think he did say, did he say, I think so. Foster Bailey had a first ray soul expressing through his 7th ray, well, let's just call it physical body, and a 2nd ray personality expressing through a fourth ray mind, leaving the second ray astral body free of impress. You know, when I've tried to calculate this for myself, I I feel I have a second ray soul expressing through a third ray mind, probably because the monad is so third ray, and a fourth ray, what did I say? Second ray soul expressing through a third ray mind, fourth ray personality expressing through a sixth ray astral body, leaving the physical body free of impress. And probably one day before long, I'll have to have it under the impress so it doesn't run away with things. Well, each one of us can study ourselves in this respect, and perhaps find, without being told, the two of the three personality vehicles through which our soul and personality individually express. That doesn't mean, I mean, soul can obviously express through all the vehicles and personality through all the vehicles, but there's a primary focus. I think a lot of the first ray souls, you know, they might have quite a strong expression through the physical body and brain. But it's different in everybody's case. I'm not sure he mentioned it anywhere for Alice Bailey. She had a second ray soul, first ray personality. Well, I can't even hazard a guess, even though her mind was on the first ray, you know. I cannot hazard a guess, not really having known her in person. But it's very interesting, and it will make quite a difference in the disciples' approach. So that's a little bit about polarization. Now, another way of talking about polarization is there mental polarization, which is not achieved so early in the course of life. Mental polarization is occurring maybe midway between the second and third initiations. But there might be mental focus, you know, that's different from polarization. Or is there emotional polarization? Well, I think for most disciples, considering polarization that way, there is mental polarization. But what about the artist who may be a disciple and whose astral body is very, very rich and who expresses himself through a kind of a Buddhic astral connection? Maybe polarization is different within the personality. Maybe somehow it's in the astral body. Now, I'm thinking of Roberto Assagioli. This is really interesting. He had a double polarization. His second ray soul was polarized in his second ray astral body. His fourth ray personality was also polarized in his second ray astral body. Well, you know, what these things really mean in terms of the dynamics and the actual technical process, we have yet to find out, but maybe know enough to see the way we are expressing. I would say at this phase of my life, almost 75, my second ray soul is interested in comprehensive understanding and inclusive understanding and synthetic understanding. And it obviously, you know, uses the mind to do that. Maybe when I was an opera director, you know, a little bit of personal history, but hopefully it reveals something of the rays. When I was an opera director on the fourth ray, the astral body was just fine because my job was to help people express emotionally on the stage so that they were convincing rather than being the typical operatic actor, you know, who reputedly can't act, but to be real singing actors. Then the 4 and 6, you know, were dominating, but fighting with the 2 and 3. Really fighting. Okay. Now there's a question of the differences of people in their status and evolution, leading to the diversity seen among men. This is not presently accounted for. We talk about genes as if they make the difference, but what is causative in relation to the genes? It's a psychological aspect. You know, when we're dealing with tangibility, many people hang on to tangibility as if it were reality, and if you try to separate them from their identification with tangibility, they think you're leading them into nothingness, into something unreal altogether. But there, you know, the Lemurian state of consciousness is a physical polarization, and we're not talking about the kind of polarization we just discussed. The Atlantean state of consciousness, in which many people still exist, is emotional, and the Aryan state of consciousness is mental. And the later Aryan, I suppose, deals with the soul-infused mind, and the sixth root race consciousness will see to the development of the, what should we call it, the intuition, really. All right, so that the status and evolution accounts for temporary difference. Just think about all this that has to be taken into consideration when the master is assigning meditations or offering advice, which will really be useful to the developing student. I think you know that one of the best methods of learning how to be a commentator or a secretary, if you're a little bit more advanced student and helping one of the younger students come through, is to read Master DK's letters. They're masterful, you know, in how they deal understandingly with the individual being under consideration. And if we could, well, imitate them or somehow develop the capacity to begin expressing ourselves along the line that Master DK has developed so very well, it would be a really significant development for sure. Okay, I'm just trying to see what happens here with light. Okay, maybe I move it back a little. All right. Then there's the astrological sign determining the trend of any particular life. You know, what we do with circumstances, the direction in which we're heading. And what we are likely to do when presented with the kinds of circumstances which the astrological chart will offer. So, you know, status is, and you know, we're talking about Ray came first, right? Ray seems to be more important, of a higher priority than the astrological configuration, but very important. And you know, I oftentimes say the rays are in the right hand, your astrology is in your left hand. You've got to deal with them both. Now there's the question of race, bringing the personality under a peculiar racial thought form. Well, that's right. I mean, you know, if you're a member of the Jewish group, the first and the third ray will be powerful. It's not a race per se, but a more religion. But maybe, you know, the different races, which are so mixed now, you know, but the white race, the black race, the yellow, the red, I mean, it's also mixed. There used to be the blue race in the early days of man, and maybe some other colors which we would look at as very, very strange today. But yes, race, and we might add nationality. will also account for differences. Now, these days, with so much travel, you can have people of the same race in many, many different countries. We find the people who live farther south may be in the northern countries, and the usual northern races may find their place in one of the more southern countries, and so forth. And also, the continent, the particular center under which one works of the 5 planetary centers, all of these make a difference and have to be factored into how a high initiate or master will treat an individual. So just repeating, the temporary differences. Temporary differences before a real rounding out occurs have to do with Ray, with approach to truth, which is either occult or mystic, have to do with polarization, whether in what way the individual is focused, status in evolution, which we don't account for very much because we don't give credit to the reality of reincarnation, astrological sign, and presumably all the factors of astrology involving the placement of the planets, and then race. And there are other factors which make for temporary differences, but we move around in different countries quite a bit. And probably we've been in different root races and sub-races, and as a result we've been impressed with the rays and astrological signs and the general energy factors associated with those major and sub categories of race. Right now, we're in the 5th root race and the 5th sub-race. The Teutonic race has had its era of expression and probably will continue through the Mercury period, but we're also heading into a period which will bring the intuition forward. 5th sub-race doesn't seem like 5th root race doesn't seem like a very long-lasting one, but in one of the references we're told that the 6th root race will last some 10 million years. I guess, can we look at occultism and say that as a result of it, people tend to develop patience? That's a big ask, but must be fulfilled. The sub-ray on which a man is found, that minor ray which varies from incarnation to incarnation, largely gives him his coloring for this life, and that's obviously, the personality ray. It's not the only sub-ray. There is from my calculations, a sub-ray of the soul found on the soul level, and it's not the personality per se. It has to do with the ashram in which you belong. Are you working with healing, maybe 2 sub 7? Are you working with the New World Religion, 2 sub 6? Are you working with the science of consciousness, 2 sub 5? Are you working with a relationship between art and union, 2 sub 4? A peacemaker. Are you working with the ability to adapt all kinds of knowledge to circumstances, 2 sub 3? I think Master Decay is along that lines, my estimation. Are you solidly in the 2nd ray, the major ashram within the 2nd ray, Kutumi's emphasis, 2 sub 2, or are you in the austere wisdom line, 2 sub 1, which was the line of the Buddha, we are told. So many differentiated influences which make for the apparently differentiated man, the man who is quite distinct from other human beings. But then there is a rounding out process, and we do develop the other rays. We've been on all the rays, DK tells us, and even though we may not develop all of them to exactly the same extent, we do have them represented in our energy system. Now, this is a great masterful statement of ambiguity, which I have, located at other times. Note, forget not that the primary ray of the monad continues throughout the eon, it changes not. And the eon, in this case, the eon may well be, the duration of a solar system. It's one of those words that is never defined particularly, it can be a round, it can be a round of larger duration, it can be, well, it usually means a period of vast scope. But look at how this is written. It suggests that the monad is the primary ray. The primary ray of the monad is one way to look at it, namely that the monadic ray is always primary, but another way of looking at it is that there is a primary ray of the monad and maybe a secondary ray. That is the way that I've chosen to look at it, the primary ray perhaps being one of the three and existing on the logoic plane and characterizing the monad when it is released as a volatile essence from the monadic vehicle, and the secondary ray of the monad being that which is found upon the monadic plane. This is my way of explaining it at this time. So the primary ray is the one that doesn't change, but is it possible that the secondary ray of the monad may undergo the same types of changes as we find in soul ray changes? The seventh ray moving to 1, the sixth and the sixth ray moving either to 2 or 3, the fifth ray moving to 1, the fourth ray moving to 2 or 3, and then we come to the rays of aspect, 3, 2, 1. And, well, there's a final absorption, of course, whichever is the final absorber. Will it be second ray as the final absorber in this solar system, which is so very second ray in its nature? Anyway, these are things to think about. It is one of the three primary rays that eventually synthesizes the sons of men. And if you kind of look at this map, there's a place where there are 7 on the monadic plane, 7 planetary logoi, who probably account in some way for 7 categories of monads. And in Letters on Occult Meditation, you get 7 circles on the monadic plane. But if we go higher than the limitations of the monadic vehicle and somehow release that monad into a new environment of the sea of fire, there are only 3. And I think that this configuration here of the 3 above the 7 tells us about monadic rays, the primary one remaining the same throughout the eon, or I think throughout the duration of a solar system. Now, the Jews are primarily on the third ray monad, but coming into this solar system, those on the third ray monad have to, by and large, move on to the second ray monad. Is this occurring on the logoic plane or on the monadic plane? I suppose it's more important somehow to actually begin to feel the presence of the monad. That's the important thing, and the type of perception and identification that it confers. All right. So the three rays synthesize the sons of men, and the primary ray remains the same, but the question arises, does what I hypothesize as the secondary ray of the monad on the monadic plane change? Because changes on that level will lead to changes below in the triad and in the soul. They're all interconnected, and when there's sufficient development of a particular ray, given the destiny of that emanated unit of life, then perhaps a new ray or rays have to be brought in to complete the destiny. The ray of the ego varies from round to round. Well, how many rounds will we be involved with? Some of us may have come from the moon chain or even from the previous solar system, but let's say that was there a type of humanity that existed in the third round? I'm not sure, but there certainly is in the fourth. And in the fifth round, new types of opportunity will be offered. So there will be some egos who are active in both the present fourth round and in the fifth round to come. The more evolved souls vary from race to race, changing the soul ray, and comprises one of the 5 rays of our present evolution. Well, it is possible, to have any of the 7 rays as one's soul ray, but you kind of wonder with the first ray whether it's the authentic first ray as the soul ray. Is there another ray that is, if not missing, then at least less frequently represented? There probably is, either because its day has not yet come, or its day came long ago. So this ray is the predominating ray to which the causal body vibrates, but as stated earlier, it may vibrate to other rays. It may correspond to the ray of the monad. When we look at the Christ, we feel that he has a second ray soul and a second ray monad. And probably the primary ray of the monad is the second ray. It may correspond to the ray of the monad, but corresponding is interesting. That can be, what should we say, along the, let's just say either the same, I'll put it this way, either the same ray or a ray that is on the same line as the monad, the 1357 line or the 246 line. It may correspond to the ray of the monad, or it may be one of the complementary colors to the primary, violet to yellow and blue to orange and green to red, to name some of these. It may be one of the complementary colors to the primary. Let's just say it is distinct from the monadic ray, and the degree of correspondence may have a lot to do with the ease of expression of the spirit later. The ray of the personality varies from life to life, but not always, The artist may be found on the same personality ray for quite a number of lives, as that artist is establishing a certain ability to receive and express. So it may be one of the complementary colors to the primary. The ray of the personality varies from life to life till the gamut of the 7 subrays of the monadic ray have been passed through. All monads have 7 subrays. And even on the level of the monad, there are 7. That's interesting. Well, we seem to be calling the personality ray a sub-ray of the monadic ray. I'm not sure that when it comes to sub-rays on the monadic plane, that we will go through all the rays as sub-rays. I think there 1 or 2 may be the maximum, just the way in the spiritual triad 1 or 2 may be the maximum, and correspondingly the ray of the soul will change, because the secondary triadal rays, check out page 177 of Cosmic Fire. The secondary triadal rays are all the same. It's not like we say, well, the ray of my Atma is 3, and the ray of my Buddhi is 4, and the ray of my abstract mind is 3 or 5. We don't do that. So the rays are all the same, and according to the ray of the permanent atoms, the 3 permanent atoms of the spiritual triad, so will be the ray of the soul. Now, the soul ray changes, probably because of some kind of impulsion from above. Say your soul is on the 6th ray. It may change to the 2nd or 3rd. This is because perhaps within the spiritual triad, there is a change of secondary ray. There's also another ray in the triad which seems to be the reflection of the monadic ray. Is it going to be one of the 7 or only one of the 3? Well, I think I've gotten into this in other places. And just a question of retrieving what I've said. I've got a book called On the Monad, but I think at the time that I wrote it, I had not yet conceived of the major or primary monadic ray as pertaining to the logoic plane, so may have found both the primary and sub-ray of the monad on the monadic plane. And from my present perspective, see how we correct things, that would be a mistake. But anyway, this is, important material here. Therefore, in dealing with people whose monads are on a similar or complementary ray, say 2 ray 2 monads, or a 2-4 or 2-6, it will be found that they approach each other sympathetically, and we may say that even regarding an aspect as high as a monadic ray. They will approach each other sympathetically and also in a fundamental sense, sympathetically. It's not just a passing sympathy, it's a fundamental resonance, sympathetically, let's call it fundamental resonance, long lasting. We must remember, however, that evolution must be far advanced for the ray of the monad to influence extensively, and basically he's saying for those who are not far advanced, the monadic ray may influence somewhat, but not extensively. So the majority of cases come not under this category. Have you ever had an individual with whom you felt there was a monadic sympathy? I felt this in my life. I have a friend, we met at the age of 7 and are still friends now into our 70s. and he's a very technical type of genius on the third and fifth rays. And from that perspective, I could have nothing to do with it, but being on the second and fourth rays. But from the monadic perspective, we both seem to have the third ray, and we are in sympathy, some sort of fundamental resonance or sympathy, which is very natural. It's something about the search for truth. Okay, so the majority of cases, don't come under this category of similarity of monadic rays, because we might, not even be able to identify the monadic ray, and even if we think we are identifying it, it's simply at this point, until confirmed by the master or in other ways, a speculation. With average advanced men who are struggling to approximate themselves to the ideal, and that's the definition of advanced man, attempting not just to be swayed by desire. Okay, so not just swayed by desire, but interested in a higher pattern we call the ideal. Then a similarity of egoic ray will produce mutual comprehension, and friendship follows. Well, in the hierarchy, there are many people on different rays, and friendship is existing because hierarchy really represents the truest form of friendship. But that's a little beyond what we can approximate. It is easy for two people on the same egoic ray to understand each other's point of view, and they become great friends with unshaken faith in each other, for each recognizes the other acting as he himself would act. But, we have to have reached the point of, point of development. We have to reach the point of development at which the egoic ray, let me make that, EGR, egoic ray, at which the egoic ray is truly functional, and is the major, egoic ray is the major ray of our life expression. But when then added to the egoic similarity, either the same or complementary, you have the same ray of the personality, then you have one of those rare things, perfect friendship, a successful marriage, an unbreakable link between the two. And this is rare indeed. Just imagine, as an esoteric psychologist, how DK can see and review people. I love this particular section of the Treatise on White Magic. It's one I've read often when doing my sort of monadic ray researches, and it has some very essential information. When you have two people on the same personality ray, but with the egoic ray dissimilar, then you have those brief and sudden friendships and affinities that are as ephemeral as a butterfly, because eventually, people go in the direction of their egoic ray if they are at all developed, and so the emphasis will be different, and you'll have them leaving behind the source of earlier affinity. These things need bearing in mind, and with their recognition comes the ability to be adaptable. Clarity of vision results in a circumspect attitude. We realize there's so much we don't know. There is so much we do not know. Well, okay, these are temporary differences between people. Now, the ray differences were mentioned at the very first, and then we've just had, an elaboration on ray differences. So, let's see what we have here. Okay. We have just had an elaboration on ray differences. Okay. Now, another cause of difference may be due to the polarization of the bodies. Now, basically what he's doing, DK is going back and selecting some of the items in his list of that which distinguishes one center of life from another. There are so many people these days who are into, well, they're into really making changes in the world. Are they guided by the divine plan? This is the question. Do they really know the destiny of humanity, or do they want to make these changes according to their sense of what will be right? And it may accord with the divine plan, or changes according to the nature of their desire, and always giving their desires special treatment over the desires of others. We need the divine plan, we need the great teaching, we need that which will produce a certain unanimity of understanding about the nature and destiny of the human being. So another cause of difference can be due to the polarization of the bodies. Unless this too meets with recognition and dealing with people, lack of comprehension will ensue. Are you the mentally polarized type? Are you emotionally polarized? Or, look, we have a lot of people really working things out in the athletic field as part of the initiatory process and resonant with necessary kinds of development in the Aryan root race. When you use the term, quote, a man polarized in his astral body, you really mean a man whose ego is working principally through that vehicle. This is, as I tried to explain above, a man whose ego works principally through that vehicle. Polarity indicates the clarity of the channel. Now, this is a very important statement. Why does polarization occur? What is it? Oh, no. That's not it. As I tried to explain above. Okay. So, clarity of the channel. And I really want to emphasize that point. DK comes up with some really interesting things here. Let me illustrate. He says, the ego of the average man has its home on the third subplane of the mental plane. Okay, he's not yet an initiate of the first degree, at which time, or at about which time, the focus of the ego moves to the second subplane. If a man has an astral vehicle largely composed of third subplane astral matter and a mental vehicle mostly on the fifth subplane, the ego will center his endeavor in the astral body. You see that? Because the ego is the higher part of man, a significant higher part. And when there is a vehicle below which is stronger, clearer, more purified than another vehicle, the ego will choose the vehicle that is in better vibratory condition. If he has a mental body of the fourth subplane and an astral body of the fifth subplane, the polarization will be mental. Well, this is foundational again. It's one of those things that as I went along, I had kind of forgotten. It was in the back of my mind, but it should have been in the forefront of my mind. All right. So think about yourself. Think about the condition, let's say, of your mental, astral, or even physical vehicle. With many first-ray souls, as I said, they seem to choose the physical. Have they trained the etheric physical to such an extent that it is of a higher vibratory caliber than the emotions or mind? Probably, I'm trying to remember, there was an artist, LDO, second ray soul, fourth ray personality, fourth ray mind. Is it second ray astral body? I can't remember. Second or sixth, and seventh ray personality. Was as an artist, was the astral body the foremost vehicle through which the second ray soul could work? I have to go back and do some research. This whole study of the rays is in its developmental stage, but just imagine what will happen to the factor of self-knowledge when the ray science can be confirmed. When you speak of the ego taking more or less control of a man, you really mean that he has built into his body's matter of the higher subplanes. And it means, what it really means is the ego can get through. Okay. The ego takes control with interest only when the man has almost entirely eliminated matter of the seventh, sixth, and even fifth subplanes from his vehicles, because that 5, 6, 7 does not belong to the etherically corresponding subplanes. So subplanes 5, 6, 7 do not belong to the etherically responding subplanes. When he has built in a certain proportion of matter of the fourth subplane, the ego extends his control when there is a certain, this is what we got there, a certain proportion of the matter of the fourth subplane, the ego extends his control. Okay. When there is a certain proportion of third subplane matter, counting from above, then the man is on the path, and it corresponds to the lowest aspect, the lowest subplane aspect of the higher mental plane, which is the third, and man can begin to be influenced by that third subplane of the higher mind. When second subplane matter predominates, then he takes initiation, and so this tells us about the first initiation and the subplane relationship. And when he has matter only of atomic substance, he becomes a master. And this occurs in earnest at the fourth initiation. And really, it's not long, the fourth initiation is followed rapidly by the fifth. In the case of the Master Jesus, he used the vehicle of Apollonius of Tyana, apparently, and Apollonius was born before him and lived longer in the body. So Master Jesus, or the initiate Jesus, could use his vehicle. Therefore, the subplane a man is on is of importance, and the recognition of his polarization elucidates life. Well, I suppose we are all focused largely on a particular subplane, and in general, the fourth subplane is the initiatory. Subplane. Okay, so interesting these technicalities of how change occurs on the atomic level, and initiation occurs accordingly. And when I say atomic level, I mean, the level of the atom. There's also changes that occur bringing in only the atoms of the atomic level, the very first subplane of any plane, and then special possibilities exist, and a very high initiate is stepping forth. I could study this over and over again. The third thing you need to remember is that even when these 2 points are admitted, the age of the soul's experience frequently causes lack of attention. A lack of comprehension. The above 2 points do not carry us very far, for the capacity to sense a man's ray is not for this race as yet. Now, what ray is that? Is it all the rays, or is it the monadic ray? Or is the soul ray also included? So, what ray? Come on now. Okay. Right, well, I've had a little freezing of the document. But anyway, when you speak of the ego taking more or less control of a man, you really mean he has built into his body's matter of the higher subplanes, so the ego can get through. And I think I've already looked at this. The ego takes control with interest. I may be repeating something here because of the frozen document. Only when he has entirely eliminated matters of the 5th, 6th, and 7th subplanes, and we're told, as far as the astral plane goes, we're not even supposed to have matter of these 6th or 7th subplanes in our astral body. When he has built in a certain proportion of matter of the 4th subplane, the ego extends his control. When there is a certain proportion of 3rd subplane, then the man is on the path. And I think I was discussing this a little earlier. This may be a bit of a repeat, but we're dealing with the higher mental plane at this point when we're dealing with the 3rd subplane, even though the majority of people will be on the 3rd subplane in terms of the polarization, or in terms of the fixation of their soul body. When 2nd plane, 2nd subplane matter predominates, he takes initiation, the focus, the ego itself moves to the 2nd subplane. Okay, the ego moves to the 2nd subplane. And when he has matter only of atomic substance, he becomes a master, and this begins to occur. This begins to occur at the 4th initiation. At least that's how it's presented, that only atomic subplane matter will be there. Will the vehicle be retained when there is only atomic subplane matter? Because after all, it's etheric. So can you retain then a dense physical vehicle? Apparently so. Therefore, the subplane a man is on is of importance, and that's where I left off with this sudden freezing, and the recognition of his polarization elucidates life. So there are 2 points here, and we will take them up in number 27. So this will be then the end of Treatise on White Magic, video commentary number 26. Whoop. This is, have to fix that, otherwise we're going to get English pounds. Number 26. When one thing goes wrong, many things go wrong. And we're on page what? I think we stopped at 111 last time, and this gives us 113. All right, page 111 to 113. And here we have the beginning of a Treatise on White Magic, video commentary number 27, and this is going to be 3.5, and the one that we're working on now is going to be 3.6, and we'll begin at page 113, and it is my great hope that I am correct about this. 3.4. Yeah, so this is 3.5. All right, sorry for that little snafu, which it took me quite a while to get out of. So anyway, all is well, I think, until I find out that it's not. And we'll be speaking to you before long, starting on commentary number 27. It's been so interesting, this business about the monadic rays and how we understand each other, and the evanescent relationships of the strictly personality ray relationships, and the more likely possibility that egoic relationships are the most common abiding ones at this time, because we're not yet into monadic abiding. Well, many things to be said, and I will review. So take care, and I'll be back. Bye-bye.